Hello and welcome to Learn Akkadian. Today I'm going to teach you how to translate the first law from Hammurabi's code. Let's get started. Here you can see Hammurabi's code as it is today displayed in the Louvre Museum in Paris, France. Zooming in closer on the text, you can see that the cuneiform script is vertically oriented, and so today we're going to be using a drawing which was published in the Codex Hammurabi Textus Primigenius by E. Bergman in 1953. So here we can see our text, and we're going to begin by forming a transliteration, which is where we're going to take the values of each sign and write them out so that we can get our Akkadian text. So first we have the shum sign, followed by the ma sign, the a sign, and the wiwa pi sign. And as you can see here, some of these signs have multiple values. So to begin, we're going to write them all out, and then based off the context, we're going to decide which values we're going to use for our final transliteration. Next, we have the lum sign, followed by the a sign and the wiwa pi sign. And then we have the lam sign. On line 3, it begins with the u2 sign. And as you can see, this dash here shows us that this is the second known attestation of the u sound. So this is just going to show us the spelling. It's not actually going to change the way that the sign makes a sound. Next, we have the ub sign and the b pi 2 kash sign, followed by the ir air sign and the ma sign. On line 4, we begin with the nes sign, followed by the ir air sign, the tam ut babar sign. And as you can see, the all caps here show us that babar is a sumerogram. And a sumerogram represents an entire Akkadian word. So in this case, babar means caspum, which is silver, but we're not going to actually be using that meaning in today's text. Next, we have the e sign, followed by lila and shu. On line 5, it begins with the id, it, with that dot showing us it's an emphatic T, et, ed, a2, followed by d, e, sa 2, and the ma sign. On line 6, we begin with the la sign, followed by the uk, ug sign, the t sign, the n sign, and the shu sign. And line 7, we begin with the mu sign, followed by ub, b pi kash, ir air, and the shu sign. On line 8, we're going to have the id, it, et, ed, a2 sign, followed by the da, ta sign, and the ak sign. So now that we have all of the values written out for each sign, we're going to decide which particular ones we're going to use in cases like wiwa pi, where the sign represents multiple sounds. So here I've decided on which value we're going to be using for each sign, and we have our final transliteration, which we're going to then combine in order to form a normalization, which is going to be our next step in the translating process. So here I've written out our transliteration for CH Law 1, and CH is just a common abbreviation in Assyriology, which means Codex Hammurabi. So next we're going to combine the different syllables into full Akkadian words as they would have been spoken. So our first word is going to combine shum and ma to get shuma. Next we're going to get awilum, and this macron which I've added here shows us that it's a long vowel. And we have to add these just based off our knowledge of vocabulary, and sometimes they can be really important because certain words are only differentiated by the macron. Now this isn't told by the sign itself, it's more told by context, because a lot of the macrons are arbitrarily added. And this is just something that people who spoke Akkadian and people who wrote Akkadian, like a scribe, would have just known based off their knowledge of the grammar. Next we have awilam, ubir ma. As you can see, this participle ma is going to remain separated from ubir to show that it's not the same word, but it is connected. Then we have nirtam, ilishu. On line 5, we have idima, and same thing's happening with ma here. Then on line 6, we have la, uktinshu. Line 7, we have mubirshu, and to end, we have idak. And as you can see, this circumflex here is showing us that there's some contraction going on. We'll talk about this later in the series, but for right now, just know that it's basically going to function like a long A sound. So here we have our normalization for Law 1 of Hammurabi's code, and now we're going to translate the Akkadian into English. So here you can see I provided a vocab box, which is going to be very useful because a lot of times Akkadian words as they appear in the text are very different from Akkadian words as they appear in a dictionary. And that's because a lot of times prefixes and suffixes were added to words and root letters of different verbs were rearranged into different forms. So a lot of times it's important to know where we're coming from in order to get the actual meaning, which might not appear obvious at the start. So our first line, Shuma Awilam, begins with the word Shuma, meaning if, followed by Awilom, which means a free man or a citizen. And as we can see, this ending shows us that it's in the nominative case, and that means that it's going to be the subject of this clause. Line 2, we have Awilam, which is again a man, but this time it has this am ending, which shows us that it's in the accusative case, and that means it's going to be the object. Next, we have Ubirma, and Ubir comes from Abarum, which is a first weak verb, and that means that its first root letter is missing, which is why it starts with a vowel. Now, the G system definition of the verb is to embrace, but here we see that the second root letter is doubled and it begins with a U, so that's showing us that it's in the D system preterite third person singular common, which means that we're going to use the D system meaning, which is to accuse. And a lot of times the D system definition is going to be the G system, but to make the G system happen. So it's to make embraced. And if you think about accusing, it would have been kind of a process where you're making someone embraced by authorities. So ubir ma is going to give us accused, and this ma is a participle, which can often be translated as and or then. And a lot of times it's just used in order to separate two clauses. So it's showing us where this first if clause ends and the next clause is going to begin. So sometimes when you're translating Hammurabi's code, ma isn't even going to have a meaning. It's just going to be kind of like a punctuation mark separating different clauses. So on line 4, we have nirtam ilishu. So nirtam means murder, and we can see this am ending is showing us it's in the accusative case, making it the object. Elishu comes from the preposition eli, which means upon or over, and this shu is a third person singular masculine possessive suffix, which changes the meaning of our word to upon him. So murder upon him. Idima, line 5. So idima is coming from nadum, which means to throw, and it's in the G system preterite third person singular common. So nadum is a third weak verb, which means that its third consonant is removed. So it doesn't have a third consonant, and that's why it has this contraction here, which we can see over the U. And this im isn't actually a root letter, it's actually just part of the dictionary ending of a verb. So whenever you see im, it's not actually going to be a root letter if it's at the end, it's just showing us that this is in the infinitive. So here we have this in, which begins assimilating to the D, and it's going to mean he threw. And as you can see here, this third person form, we're having to provide the pronoun. So with ubirma, which is also a third person singular, we already have something in the nominative. So we already have a subject, a man accused. But here, since we only have something in the accusative, murder, we're going to have to provide he, because it's probably referencing the man. So we know it's probably a masculine third person. Now next we have ma, which is again a participle. And on line 6 we have la uktinshu. So la means not, and it's going to usually function as a negation which precedes a verb. Our verb here is uktinshu, which comes from kanum. So kanum is a second weak verb, and we can tell by this circumflex over the first vowel. And in the G system, it means to be firm. So with the D system meaning to make, the G meaning, it's to make firm, or more literally to prove. And based off this T and this U, we know that this is going to be the D system perfect third person singular common. And you might be wondering why there's no doubling of the second root letter, as is common with the D system, and that's because kanum is actually missing its second root letter. So that's why we're just getting uktinshu with no double consonants. This is in the third person masculine singular here, but it's also got a third person masculine singular accusative suffix shu added. So it's not having proved him. So accusative means it's going to be an object. So he hasn't proved him guilty of murder. So next we have mubirshu. And mubirshu comes from abarum again, just like ubir, but this time it's a participle. So participle means someone who performs an action or has an action performed on them. And this is a third person singular masculine participle with an accusative suffix, and that's that shu, which we see on the end. So performing the action of accused is the one who accused him because of this object suffix. And line 8, we have edak, which comes from dakum, which means to kill. And this is the in system meaning. And we know this because the first root letter, which is this D, is being doubled. And that's a telltale sign that this verb is in the in system. And here it's a durative tense, third person singular common. So durative can either mean something in the present, like he kills, or something in the future, like he will kill. And since this is a law and this verb is coming at the end, it's probably the prescribed punishment for the crime. So we're going to translate it as a future tense, will be put to death. So here we have our literal translation for Law 1 of Hammurabi's Code. If a man, subject, accused a man, is our object, murder upon him he threw, not having proved him, the one who accused him will be put to death. So now we're going to take this literal translation and change it into something a little bit more fluid to get our final translation, which is, if a man accused a man of murder but did not prove him guilty, the accuser will be put to death. And this is our final translation for the first law of Hammurabi's Code. And just to note, a lot of times Hammurabi's Code is broken down into different laws, but this is somewhat arbitrary and something that scholars have kind of done to make analysis a little more simple. But we don't actually know that these were real prescribed laws because they're not numbered on the stele. So calling it the first law is really just showing that it is the first kind of concise idea within this text. It's not actually a defined law. And we don't even know if Hammurabi's Code was a real legal code. It might actually just been a set of ideals which were more of a propaganda object. So this is something that's really interesting and it's worth looking more into. But I just wanted to give a little disclaimer that this isn't hard and fast Law 1. This is what was the punishment for accusing someone of murder and not proving them guilty. We don't actually know if this was carried out in ancient times, but it's super interesting because it shows that in ancient civilization, if you were going to accuse somebody of a crime and you couldn't back it up, you were definitely going to face punishment, and this was definitely not something that was morally right to do. If you're interested in learning more about Hammurabi's Code, I'd recommend checking out the ehammurabi.com website because it's a great resource for practicing your Akkadian. It provides drawings of the original stele, transliterations, which give the sign values of each drawing. So it's great to actually learn the meanings of each sign. Then it gives a normalization, which is the Akkadian as it would have been spoken, and then it gives a translation. So it shows you everything within the deciphering process, and it's a great way to actually read the text, and it's really good for practicing your Akkadian grammar. So some of the stuff which I went over in this video, I haven't covered yet, and I'm going to go over it in the series. So make sure you stay tuned, and as always, thank you for watching.